Hey, welcome everybody. In this video we're going to be talking about using Radius with Cisco's Identity Services Engine to do kind of like centralized authentication. You'll see here I have a web server that I'm working with. I can come in here and I can log in with a local account. But what we want to see about doing is Radius through ISE policy. So one of the things we need to look at first, let's come in here and do an app list grep for Radius. And once we see all the potential options we have, we can see about running this through. So let's see, sudo apt install. Let's see, we need lib pam-radius-auth, free radius, I believe it's -utils, -y, put in our sudo password, and this should run through the Radius installation of these two separate systems. Once this is done, we need to look at the pam-radius-auth file. So let's do a sudo nano etc pam. What do we have? Do we have any options here? We should have a pam_radiusauth.conf. We come in here and we see the comp file. But what we need to do is come here and look at the server, shared secret, and timeout. So what I want to do is come over here to Identity Services Engine. We're going to see we're on 7.150. So from my web server, let's say 192.168.7.150. Let's just do temp, timeout, I don't know, 5. That should work for us. That's kind of it for now. We'll hit Control X, save modified buffer, and then we'll choose the file to write, pam-radiusauth.conf. But I want to make sure we look at the other file as well. So let's come back and do a cat for etc pam_radiusauth.conf. Permission denied. Let's check out the IP address of this host, which is going to be 5.251. So let's come over here to Cisco ISE and create a network device. NTR web, oh actually it's iweb01 192.168.5.251. This is going to be Linux. We don't really have this ability here, so we'll just leave it as Cisco for now. We'll turn on Radius. The shared secret is temp, T-E-M-P. We can require DTLS if we want, and we can do key wrap, but right now we're just kind of testing this out to see how it works. So let's just hit submit, and you're going to see now that we have a client, NTR iWeb, which I did web I. It doesn't matter, we can change the name, it doesn't hurt anything. But one of the things we need to do now is determine users. So in this case, I have my accounts on ntras.local, so let's do sudo user add, let's just do timsa disabled -password. We'll make it a quiet configuration, and GECOS. Alright. Add user, oddly enough, timsa disabled password quiet GECOS question. All right, there we go. Now we have our user added, timsa. So we need to come back over here to Identity Services Engine and create a Radius policy. So let's create a new policy set. We'll call this Linux radius. All right, let's see. Attribute. We need to figure out what we want this to be. So radius framed. Here you go. Protocol, network access protocol radius, use. So you're going to see now that we have a policy set that says if we see radius, we can do the allow protocols and go into this. But one of the things I also like to do is an AND. So let's see, network device, network access, device IP 192.168.5.251. So we have a radius call from 192.168.5.251. Verify once again, that's our IP address, 5.251. Allowed protocols, default network access, let's leave that as is and go into our configuration of this particular policy. All right, authentication policy. Well, by default, we have all user ID stores and we have an authorization policy. So one of the things we can do right here is specify certain users or specify groups or internal groups, Active Directory groups, what have you. One of the things that I'm just going to do here is, let's see, subject, network access username is timsa, and this we will allow permit access. So you're going to see here we have all user ID stores. So we're going to save this for the moment and take a look at the identity sources that we have. In this case, we can come over here to identity source sequences to look at that all user ID stores that we talked about before. So you're going to see here internal users is first, Active Directory join points, and guest users. So what we can do is we can actually come in here and create a local identity for like my account as an example, make it an internal user and give it login information. And we can use ISE as an authenticating service for Radius and Linux. Otherwise, we can come over here to external identity sources and we can tie into Active Directory. So let's see, join point name, ad-ntr, ntras.local. Would you like to join all ISE nodes? Well, there's only one, but we'll still hit yes. So I'm just going to use my administrator account. We can also store the credentials if we wanted to, but these typically do change, and we're actually joining it to AD. So we don't necessarily need to save the credentials, but it's always an option. So you're going to notice here that NTR ISE 01 has now been joined, it looks like, to ntras.local, ad-ntr. So we can come back over here to policy sets and specify what we want the authentication policy to be. In this case, we have the all user ID stores, or we can choose whatever we would like. In this case, we only want AD authentication. We can choose that, as well as what happens when auth fails, user not found, or process fails. In this case, reject, drop, and continue. Typically, if it fails, not found, or process fails, we just like to stop the configuration. In this case, we could add user groups in here, like Linux_admins, and whoever's in that group will, be allowed if they authenticate properly in the authentication policy rule. So in this case, TimSA, Active Directory, we have Radius. The only thing I'm kind of worried about right now is the allowed protocols and server sequences, but we'll check on that in a minute. From our web server, we can do a rad test command. Rad test username and then the password. Of course, you're going to see here that you can see my password, so I'm not going to do that for the moment. What I am going to do is do a login from Active Directory. But what we're going to do also is come over here to the Radius live logs to see what occurs. In this case, once I try to log in, it says login incorrect. So we come back over here to our Radius logs and see if it says anything. Now, sudo nano etc pam.d/sshd. Interesting. Auth sufficient pam underscore radius underscore auth dot so. Interesting. So let's try this again. SSH timsa at 192.168.5.251. Nope. Oh, there you go. What does it say? Wrong authentication against Active Directory. Wrong password. Did I enter the wrong password again? Holy crap, and I'm logged in. Wow. Apparently I can change my password. I'm wondering where this changes it. But anyway, that's kind of it. We were able to create Radius authentication through ISE using Linux. Of course, for some reason I can't see any data on that, but we'll look at the permit access. We have our endpoint ID that we logged into. My AD account, of course, ADNTR. I logged in via my Active Directory account. It's a PAP ASCII authentication method. Radius does encrypt the authentication information, so even though it's the password authentication protocol PAP, it should be encrypted, at least from a Radius standpoint. But one of the things I still need to do is go through here and be like, okay, well, let's do a packet capture. Did it, in fact, encrypt the password, or can someone sniff the network and actually see it? But anyway, that's it. That is installing free Radius to make a Ubuntu server, in this case, running SSH. So I kind of need to figure out how to create Radius as a console-based authentication. From here, one of the things I wanted to do is do an ll/etc pam. So we have the pam.conf, pam.d, which is really interesting because if you remember looking at the pam.d/sshd, well, for some reason it calls to a pam_radius_auth.so. I have no idea what that SO is. So let's see if maybe we can find it. Sudo find grep pam_radius_auth.so. Alright. Let's do a sudo cat user lib security ham radius SO, and it's woof. I don't even know what that's about. But anyway, that's pretty much it. This gave us the ability to provide radius authentication to Ubuntu using Cisco ISE policy. Now I want to just come back through here and reiterate what we did. We created a policy set for Linux radius, network access protocol. So if you have a radius request and it's from these source devices, in this case 5.251 is my web server, we use the default network access. In this case it's PAP ASCII. We view this. Authentication policy by default looks at Active Directory. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice here is that any user in Active Directory can authenticate. So if someone tries to log into the Linux box and they have an AD account, they're basically allowed. However, it's the authorization policy where you create the auth rules that allows whomever permitted access to the specific device. If you have a different user, they are denied access. So one of the things I wanted to show us really quick, let's log out and log in as my administrator. So one of the things we'll see here is that the administrator account is indeed authenticated, but it's not allowed. So let's see what we have here. User authentication against Active Directory fails since user, well, I put in the wrong bloody password again. If you think back to one other thing, however, let's do SSH ntras 192.168.5.251, which is the same password as my administrator, by the way, so I know it works. Sudo, I think it's user add administrator disabled password. Like we did before, we did the quiet command and the gcos, and something's wrong. Sudo user add administrator disabled password quiet. Add user. Well, for some reason I keep trying to do user add, which is killing me here. So I added the user for administrator now. So let's try this again. Ah, there you go. Rejected per authorization rule. So one of the things you're going to notice is that the username administrator now authenticated to AD. If in Linux you do not add the user, it won't even bother to send it to Radius, right? But once it gets authenticated, it now needs to be authorized. So one of the other things we can do is come in here to AD, and this might take a little bit more work, but let's see what we can do for an authorization policy. In this case, I want to have a group, identity group. Let's just do identity group. This is where we would choose group names. In this case, you're going to notice it's all built-in type stuff. We do not have an AD group name here, so we need to add it. So let's come over here to groups, user identity groups, and I'm going to create a top user identity group called AD. Submit. From AD, I'm going to create a child group called Radius. From here, you can create any other item that you want, such as Linux. So from here, I have a Linux folder that I'm going to create users from. Now we can do this, of course, where we come in here and add users that are included in like Cisco ISE. But we don't have any internal identity groups here. But that's what you're going to notice. These are groups that are local. So doing this might have been pointless. One of the other things that we have to do, or in this case can do, is look at the external identity sources and look at groups. This is where we need to select groups from the directory where we can do a name filter such as domain. In this case, 0 groups are retrieved, so let's try it again. There you go. Entraz local users domain admins, and we hit OK. Now we have an AD group as opposed to an internal to ISE group. So keep in mind, these groups here, this is an ISE internal group. This is a group that is queried through whatever, in this case, Active Directory. So back over here in policy sets, let's come down here to authorization policy, and we're going to modify this. Instead of network access username, we can do an AD NTR. Oh, this is what I was looking for earlier. AD NTR external groups domain admins. Once you use this and save, let's try to log in to our web server again with the administrator account. And you're going to notice it let me in. The reason why it let me in is because the administrator account is a part of the domain admins group. So administrator.entraz.local AD groups domain admins. Because it's in this domain admins group, you're going to notice that in the groups retrieval, the policy states that if you're in the AD group domain admins, you are now allowed in. Cat var www html index. There you go. And that's a couple of different ways to do authentication using Radius and ISE. We can do it through Active Directory. You can do RSA. Pretty much anything that has the ability of being an external identity source. In this case, you can even do certificates. Certificates, AD, LDAP itself, ODBC or a database. Radius tokens, if you have an external Radius server. Secure ID for RSA. SAML, and of course social login. So you can actually have people log in to a provider. So like if you got provider information from, say, Facebook, you can actually have people log in using their Facebook account. Say if you want to have like guest Wi-Fi or something like that. I know it's outside the scope, but there you go. Active Directory authentication passed to Radius for SSH authentication in Ubuntu. So one thing that had occurred to me is the fact that if you log in with an account such as TimSA as an example, and we log into this, if we do a sudo command, it requires a password. Now, I had assumed that when you type this in, it's going to go back to Radius for that particular password. But the problem is, the sudo command is checking for a local password for the user attempting to sudo. Now, keep in mind, you do have the ability to do the password command here, PASWD, and then give yourself a password, but you need the current password. In this case, it's blank, so you probably just hit enter and move on. But what I wanted to actually show us is how to provide sudo access via Radius. That way you don't have to worry about having local passwords for your Radius users. So, as we might have saw before, when we logged into a user that has sudo access, we have to ask ourselves how that works. So if you do, sudo add user, and then we, add the user here, right? We're giving a disabled password. It doesn't have one. So we need to go into the sudoers file and modify it. If we do sudo visudo, which is basically the text editor for visudo, we can log in with our sudoers account, and you'll see here the privileges and members of groups that have certain privileges or executing commands. Now, once again, because we don't have a password, we want it to not ask for one. So what we can do, if you log into a local account such as admin, or in my case ntras is my only account and it's in the sudoers group, we come here and it's really weird. I tried to place this configuration here because it's, user privilege specification, right? But it would never work for me. For some reason, as soon as I came down here and typed something in, so like as an example, you can do timsa, or you can do group names. It basically shows you right there, sudo. So if you're in the sudo group, you have a certain amount of, privilege. So in this case, I'm going to do sudo all equals parentheses all, and then after that is no passwd colon all. Once this is done, we hit Control X, save the buffer, and write. Looks good so far. Now what we can do is cat etc group and grep for sudo. So in this case, I did the sudo user mod add to group sudo and then the name of the user. In this case, timsa administrator and my account ntras are a part of the sudo group. And based on what you see above, allow members of the group to group sudo to execute commands. The no password all, which I'm kind of curious now, if I put this under that allow members of group sudo, will it work the same way? So from here, I'm going to exit out and log in with timsa. And once again, local account, no password. It's all Radius authentication, and it logs me in. From here, I can do certain things like sudo visudo, and it lets me in now without a password. That's kind of the whole point, right? You want people to log in via SSH or the console to be able to, do certain commands without having a local password. So what I'm going to do here, I'm really curious about this. I'm going to go here and I wonder, I guess we could play around a little bit. So no password all. I'm going to put that here and see if that makes a difference, which save, write. Just going to exit out to make sure everything works. Sudo visudo, and it doesn't ask for a password. So yeah, you don't actually need to do this under the include dir. You can just add the no password to that existing line. Oh, there's one other thing that I didn't mention earlier. So when we looked at the SSH daemon allowing the PAM radius auth, So we're going to do cat pam.d sshd. And it's at the top. So let me do a grep for auth. So you're going to see here we added the auth sufficient pam radius auth.so to the pamd.sshd. One of the things you're going to notice, however, is I am on a console, not SSH, and radius is working. So what I did was I just looked at the pamd directory to see what else was in there. So in this case, the pam.d directory also has a bunch of other options here. SSHD's there, sudo's there, system user, VM tools, etc. These are all login, authentication things. But what I did was I came here and I said, well, let me look at the etc pam.d/login. This file right here is basically the SSHD, but for console. I added this right here, the auth sufficient pam radius auth.so, the same one I had in the SSHD, and now I was able to authenticate via radius on the console and in SSH. So keep that in mind. You can play around a little bit to see what all these different requirements are. There's a sudo file right here. We can come in and look at the sudo file just to see what it says. Session required, PAM environment, SO, read environment, user, environment files, random stuff. But anyway, like I said, you add those that one command to the login and the SSHD, and now you can log in via SSH and console. We looked at technically it's the sudo visudo command that gets us into a sudoers.temp file. I really don't know why they did this, but this file must be edited with the visudo command as root. Please consider adding local content in etc sudoers.d instead of directly modifying this file. So you can do that as well. So let's check out the sudoers.d. ll etc sudoers.d. There's a readme there, so I don't know why you would do anything with that. But if you look at the etc sudoers file itself, this is basically the visudo that we were at earlier. That was more of like a symbolic kind of link. Sudo visudo is just quicker than doing sudo vi or sudo nano etc sudoers. But anyway, you're going to notice here the sudo all no password. What I put in the sudo visudo, and as you see, it also says must be edited with visudo, so it's kind of weird. Please consider adding local content in the sudoers.d instead. That's what it means. So you can put other stuff in this directory, sudoers.d. I don't really know what that is, but hey. Now we have radius authentication, and we've made it so anyone part of the sudo group does not have to put in their password. Because, well, they don't have one. Alright, moving on. Alright everybody, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it comes in handy. I know we jumped around a little bit. Hopefully it works out for you. I'll see you in the next one.